So in today's video, we are going to be discussing the biggest winners of the 2022 NFL Draft. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So I want to clarify a couple things before we actually get into the video. One, this is actually just going to be based off of what happened in the first round, because we usually judge teams and players based off of what happens in the first round. We usually don't go back into the later rounds and judge those picks as harshly as we do in the first round. So the first round is really the most important night of the draft, and this is what we usually judge teams on. And second, I'm really going to take this from the angle of teams that are usually bad and teams that don't get talked about much other than being just a laughingstock of the NFL mainly. And I wanted to give them a little bit of love. I wanted to talk about the teams that I think actually made some good moves. And then also there's another caveat that because this draft had no quarterbacks, I really do think it was harder for teams to actually screw up this draft because they didn't have the temptation to take a quarterback. So I think that really helped a lot of these teams. And a lot of it also had to do with the fact that regime changes to these teams also had played a factor into it. But let's get right into the biggest winners of this year's draft. So my first team that I have is the New York Jets. They drafted Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, and Jermaine Johnson. I really think the New York Jets did a fantastic job in this year's draft. Joe Douglas had an amazing draft for the Jets, selecting Sauce Gardner at 4, getting great corner help for that defense, getting another huge piece for Robert Saleh to play with, help that defense improve, because that defense was really bad last year, and it's really going to help the Jets become that defense that they know they can become with Robert Saleh at the helm and with him being their defensive head coach. So I think that's a really nice move for the Jets. Then they drafted Garrett Wilson at number 10, getting Zach Wilson some wide receiver help. I really love that because Zach Wilson showed some promise last year, and then they're just getting him even more wide receiver help to go along with Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, CJ Uzomah. They added some really nice pieces this offseason, and then they also got Garrett Wilson, who is a fantastic wide receiver at Ohio State. So it's going to be a nice offense for the New York Jets. And then obviously defensively, they got Jermaine Johnson. They traded back into the first round with the Titans. They traded their 35th pick, their 69th pick, and 163rd pick to move up to 26 and take Jermaine Johnson. So the Jets, they were making moves in this year's draft. Some people are saying that, Jermaine Johnson fell, so he's going to be, not as good as maybe the board and what people ranked him as to be. But I think the New York Jets, they made the correct moves. They improved their defense. They're helping out Zach Wilson as much as they possibly can, getting some defensive players to improve that defense that was really bad last year. And the New York Jets, we're not talking about them as a team that messed up their draft. Their first round was fantastic. They made all the correct moves, and I really like what the New York Jets did this year. Which leads me to the next New York team, the New York Giants. Again, another New York team that didn't mess it up. And I also believe that this had everything to do with the fact that there's new management involved with the New York Giants. It's a whole nother ball game this year with the Giants. It's not Dave Gettleman. It's not Joe Judge anymore. Joe Schoen and then Brian Daboll at the helm. So I think they did a great job in their first draft with the New York Giants. They drafted Kayvon Thibodeaux and Evan Neal. There was a lot of talk about Kayvon Thibodeaux not being, the guy that people want to draft high. I like the Giants kind of ignoring that because he was a stud in college. I don't know what this was all about. He might be a bit of a handful to deal with. Whatever it is, I like the Giants not overreacting to that story, just taking the best defensive player that they could, getting help on the edge, which they needed, and I really like the move that they made. I don't like when teams overreact to negative stories. He's a young kid. We were all young and stupid at one point. I'm still young and stupid. Kayvon Thibodeaux, he'll develop into his own. He'll become an even better player. He was great at Oregon, so I really like that move for the defense of the New York Giants. And then they also added Evan Neal, getting Daniel Jones some help on that offensive line, really going to be able to protect him. And then hopefully maybe if Saquon is healthy for a full season, Saquon may be able to run behind that. And then you also have Brian Daboll, who's there now, their new head coach. So the Giants, they made a lot of good moves in this year's draft with the way that they redid their management and then just the way they went into the draft, drafted really well, addressing the needs that they needed, and they drafted really good players. So the New York Giants, another New York team that didn't mess up this year's draft. And then the next team that I have that I really like the moves they made was the Detroit Lions. Now, Aiden Hutchinson fell right into the laps of them because I really thought he would go number 1. I never really understood the hype for Trayvon Walker because when you have a guy like Aiden Hutchinson who was talked about since the college football season ended as possibly going number one. I think usually that's what happens is teams will just stick it out, go with that guy. So I really thought he would go number one overall, but he fell right to Detroit, which I really like that pick for them. And then they also got Jameson Williams, and I really, really like that pick. He's a great wide receiver out of Alabama. But again, the Lions, another team with a great draft. It makes a lot of sense to draft Aiden Hutchinson when he falls to you at number 2, getting some help on that defense, getting a great edge rusher who now gets to stay home in his state of Michigan. But he's going to be great for the Detroit Lions. It's going to be fun to see him and Dan Campbell work together on that defensive line. It's going to be fun to watch and see what he does to opposing offensive linemen. Let's see how big of an impact he makes in the games, because he was a great football player in college. And then you also have the Lions drafting Jameson Williams when they kind of fleeced the Minnesota Vikings, moving up to 12 to draft Jameson Williams, because the Lions got the 12th and 46th pick, but then the Vikings got the 32nd, 34th, and 66th pick. So I think the Lions just like flat out fleeced them. I didn't really understand that pick, because the Lions really weren't giving up that much to move up in the draft and select Jameson Williams, but he's going to be a great wide receiver. He's going to be great help for Jared Goff next season, because then you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was really, really good last year for the Lions, and then you bring in a guy like Jameson Williams, who was great in college at Alabama. He is coming off of an injury, but all reports show that he should be ready by training camp, so he should be ready by the start of the preseason and the end of the regular season. So it's going to be a really exciting time to watch Detroit Lions football, which is really weird to say, because they have 2 great young wide receivers that were real. One was really good in Amon-Ra St. Brown last year. You bring in Jameson Williams, who was great in college, and then you also have Jared Goff, who they're giving weapons around him. So we're going to see what Jared Goff can kind of do, because I feel like his time in Detroit's coming to an end. He's probably going to be a backup quarterback here in a few years. But overall, I really like the moves the Detroit Lions made. They made the right moves to improve their team. Now we just got to see how they execute it on the field. Which brings me to my final team, which is a team that completely took over the draft, it kind of felt like, on night one, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles, drafting Jordan Davis and then trading for AJ Brown. Howie Roseman had an insanely good night one of the draft, an insanely good first round of the draft, and overall a really good draft. And just as a side note, because I know we're talking mainly about the first round here, they were able to snag linebacker Nakobe Dean out of Georgia in the 3rd round, who kind of fell and just dropped in the draft like crazy, and they were able to pick him up. So that's just another nice piece added to the defense of the Philadelphia Eagles. But if we're looking at their first round, the guys that we're really going to judge them on, well, first we're going to judge Jordan Davis. He's part of that Georgia defense. That Georgia defense was absolutely insanely loaded. They had 5 guys drafted in the first round of this year's draft, and Jordan Davis, no different. The Eagles jumped up to number 13 to select Jordan Davis. They kind of jumped the Baltimore Ravens, who it looked all signs reporting that the Ravens were going to go after Jordan Davis, and then the Eagles jumped them, got into the mix in the first round of the draft, took him. Really liked the move, because then you pair him up with Fletcher Cox. That's going to be an amazing duo in Philadelphia next year. That should be insane. They should be wrecking games left and right next year, especially on the inside. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch those two play. And then they traded their 18th pick and 101st pick to the Tennessee Titans to take AJ Brown, which is something nobody saw coming. But again, Howie Roseman was a madman in this year's draft, went big, then gave AJ Brown a big contract once he did get traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, I really like this move. I know this isn't technically a draft pick, but it had a lot of impact on this year's draft. I really like it, because it kind of changed the way the Tennessee Titans drafted, because it just changed the way that both of those teams kind of ran their draft. And I really like the move that the Eagles made, because then you give Jalen Hurts another weapon to play with. You have Devonta Smith, who was really good last year coming out of Alabama in his rookie year. Those two guys together should be an insanely fun duo. It's going to be a good offense next year. I think it's going to be a great offense. I think this is the year that Jalen Hurts can really take that huge step, that huge leap that he needs to make. The Eagles, they made the playoffs last year. I know they got bounced by the Buccaneers, and I know some Eagles fans are upset that they didn't go defense. Based off the moves that the Eagles made, they got Nakobe Dean, I know that's in the 3rd round. They traded for AJ Brown, and then their first round pick, they took Jordan Davis. I really like the moves the Eagles made, and personally, I really think that the Eagles could be considered maybe the favorite in the NFC East. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to sit on that. I'd have to think about that. But just based off the offseason the Cowboys had, the Eagles had, the Giants had, and Washington has had, I just think that the Eagles, they made more of the correct moves, and the draft was no different. The Eagles had an insanely good draft, and I really like the moves they have made. But those are my biggest winners from the 2022 NFL draft. Give me your biggest winners down below, and I'll see you in the next one.